Good morning folks, and welcome to the workshop. This video I'd like you to think of as part 4 of the stitching videos. This is taking the technique that we've learnt in videos 1, 2 and 3 on the saddle stitch videos, modern style, and looking at an application. That application is stitching multiple layers together. The technique, and if you haven't watched those videos, go back and watch those videos, because much of what I say in here may not make sense if you don't. That stitching style is incredibly versatile. My stitching style, I've developed this over the last 10 years, I call it my pre-pricking style of stitching. And the principle is making all the holes first. Here, more than any other place, that really shows its merit, and it allows you to follow the path of least resistance. I say this a lot, and I will reiterate it here. Saddlery is not leatherwork. We are bound in saddlery in how we produce a working seam, predominantly pricking irons and an awl. In leatherwork, we are not bound by those constraints. We are not trying to produce a working seam. A working seam ensures that the thread will not ride or slip. This is where the thread moves independently of the leather. If that happens, and we are using perhaps a natural fibre, the thread will fur, snap, the seam will fail. If we are using a synthetic thread, then perhaps that would be stronger than the leather, it would saw, but the seam would fail. In leatherwork, there is no seam that is tested to the same degree as the seam on a saddle or a bridle or a harness. So we have a much broader range of options, and this pre-pricking style is part of that option set. Now, that's not to say you don't need to know how to use an awl. There are plenty of situations in leatherwork where awl work is required, and we are going to be using an awl in this, but we're going to be using an awl a different way, and we're going to be using a slightly different awl as well. Now, the awl that you're probably used to seeing is something like this. This is an English harness awl or a saddle's awl. It depends whose hands it's in. But quite simply, the blade is tapered and the tip is sharp, not the body. That's a misnomer. If you sharpen the edge of the awl, you will slice a much bigger hole. And that slice, under pressure, will extend. It will tear. The idea is to try and round the end of our holes to make them stronger to ensure that tearing doesn't happen. Now, if we want a very fine hole, we only use a very small part of the blade. If we want a bigger hole, we come down and we push the blade in further. And we increase and decrease the size of our hole according to the stitching that we're doing, the thread that we're using, and so it goes. There is a lot of difficulty in learning to use a tool like this, because we have to get the angle of the blade right, we have to get the depth right, we have to get the horizontal plane, and we have to get the lateral plane all correct to ensure our stitching comes out on the back correctly. In this video, we are going to be using an awl, but we are going to be using a soft awl. Same thing. However, the difference is it's not sharp. It's been polished off so the tip is blunt. The idea behind this, it's very similar to the needles that we're using, and these are John James No. 4 Saddler's harness needles, and they are blunt. Because the idea behind this, if you are using an awl to make your holes, the awl has made the hole. We do not want the needle to make the hole, we want the needle to find the hole. We are making our holes with an iron, not an awl, so we don't need that. I'll be using a set of KS blade 4.5mm irons to make our holes. Slightly larger SPI makes the whole thing a little bit more visual, and this is a 12th tooth option. This is making the hole for us. This is working the same as the needle, but trying to find the hole with a needle with a very small grip is difficult. So we're going to use the awl to open the hole up as we stitch, because the principles of this iron is the tip of the tooth is sharp. So if we call the tip of the tooth 2 mil, I think it's less, it's possibly closer to 1.8. But if we call it 2 millimeters, that's the size of the hole that we're making. For a working seam, that could be too big, so this is not a good option for that. But the edge of the teeth are blunt. So as we drive the iron into the leather, we have cut a 2 millimeter slit, but we are stretching the hole bigger. The thing that happens when we take this iron out is the leather begins to close back up again to its smallest cut, in this instance 2 mil. If we're in a particular damp environment, and today here in the workshop it's absolutely hammering it down outside, so there's a lot of moisture, which means the minute I cut this leather with the irons to make the hole, that's going to absorb the moisture and that's going to cause the holes to close up quicker. That's going to make stitching harder. Were we to have made the holes yesterday, come back today and carry on, we'll find it a lot harder because the holes have closed up. We can use something like a soft awl to open those holes up. We are not cutting a new hole, we are going through the same hole. So learning how to use an awl in this fashion is a really good option if traditional saddle stitching is on your horizon. Now, you can't buy these. If you ask for a soft awl at any of your suppliers, they won't know what you're talking about. This is something that I came up with to develop this style of stitching and to assist people having difficulty going through, in particular, multiple layers. So softening it all up, basically polishing the tip so it's rounded and blunt, assists with this process, and we're going to look in detail how that's applied. But you have to buy an awl and then you have to make it. Nobody makes a soft awl. Although after this video, you never know, some suppliers will make a soft awl. Do that, because some people don't have the facility of polishing blades at home. So there's a really good option for you tool suppliers out there. The next thing that we want is a bit of beeswax. Beeswax is fantastic. This is particularly hard beeswax. I don't know the properties, but I do know I have soft and hard beeswax. This is particularly hard. Beeswax is weird because we can use it as a lubricant when we're polishing our edges up, but it also grips our needles if we are struggling pulling through. One thing you should never be doing is pushing your needle into the leather with a tool. And I see so many people turning the awl round and using the back of the awl to push a needle. The question is always going to be, if you are using that much force to push the needle in, how are you getting it out? This is now resorting to things like pliers. There are occasions, especially when we're doing back stitches or we're stitching particularly difficult leather like bridle, a heavy bridle like 5 mil, that beeswax even isn't going to cut it. We are going to have to resort to a pair of pliers or the like. The secret there is not to use a pair of pliers that is made from a steel harder than your needles. I've seen people using Leathermans and all sorts of different professional pliers that are used for different jobs, and what's happening there is you will scar your needle. You will cause very, very fine shards to appear on the edge of your needle, and if you continue stitching with that needle, those shards will damage your thread. You're introducing a failure point, and that's going to damage your seam because your thread will begin to unravel and basically come apart because you cut it so much. If you're going to use pliers to pull your needle out, use a metal that is softer than your needle. And a really good option is using something like jeweler's pliers. You can even get rubber jaw pliers that will grip, pull through all day long. Just look for jeweler's pliers because they use them on soft metals. They're ideal. And you also want smooth jaw pliers. You don't want teeth in there. Teeth will mark the needle. The needle will damage the thread the seam will fail. Without doubt, this is another verbose video. Lot of talking on my part, but there's a lot of information to get across. If you skip to the bit where you see me doing stuff, you're missing out. Okay, this isn't a quick how-to. Anybody that's watched the first 3 videos will know it's not a how-to. Oh, I'll do it this way, watch me. You're not learning anything, you're just watching them, but you don't know why they're doing it, you don't know how they're doing it, or what they're trying to achieve through using that process. These bits where you've got me talking at you is filling those gaps in. I am going to teach you how to use my pre-pricking style, same as the other 3 videos, and apply it to multiple layers. If this is what you want, watch the whole video. You will get everything that you need. Think of this as a lesson. You will learn what to do, how to do it, why we do it, and where you can apply it. And you will come away from this with a rounded body of information that you can apply to your work. If you know the how, why, and where, and something goes wrong, you can fix it. When we're doing something and something goes wrong and we don't know why it went wrong, we can't fix it. So you are then battling a brick wall. You don't know how to progress. You could be changing something that isn't wrong because you think that's what it is. Thinking's a dangerous thing. I think it's all right. I think that'll do it. We should really be getting to a point where we know it's all right. We know we can do it. And if we have that information, we are better armed to problem solve a situation when it goes wrong and progress forward. It's development. If you're still struggling or you want to learn more techniques, come and see me in the workshop. Join the channel, Secrets from the Workshop. There's a plethora of information and all the videos on the channel are like this. It's not just showing you, it's teaching you. So, enough waffle. Let's actually get some leather and have a look at applying this information to our leather to achieve the best goal that we can. I am going to make a huge assumption. I have to, otherwise this video will be too big. I have to assume you have watched the first 3 videos and you know the stitching style that I'm using here. If you don't, it won't make sense. I can't reteach you in every video. You have to look at it as a series. This is why this is being labelled as number 4. So if you haven't, stop here, go back, watch those, practice it, come back and watch this video. Here I have 4 pieces of 3mm thick shoulder leather. This is Lamport from Metropolitan. If you are looking at any of the tools and you are wondering what I'm using, where I've got them from, who the supplier is, rather than email me and ask me, go to my website, secretsfromtheworkshop.com. Click on the tab Supplies. You do not have to be a subscriber to the channel to access this. This is accessible by everybody. On that page, you will see all the suppliers that I know, love and trust. Go a little bit further down, there's a beginners section. There's a section that states beginners tool list. That's a downloadable PDF with live links, all the tools that I use, the leather, the awl, the clam, the irons, thread, needles are on that list. You can then find the suppliers that I use where I get my stuff from. If you are not in the UK, all of those suppliers ship internationally, but you know what you're looking for and you can perhaps begin to look more locally. So this is from Metropolitan, that's on the list. So this is 12mm thick, ½ an inch. We are going to be stitching this. This is a lovely representation of perhaps a knife sheath. Knife sheaths are a prime example for this technique. We look at our multiple layers. Here we have the front piece, here we have the back piece, and then we have our pieces in the middle. Now, it depends on the style of knife that you have, the style of knife that you're making, as to how many. But let's have a look at this one. Here we have 3 layers. So we have the back, the front and the welt. But then, because we put a tapered welt towards the top to accommodate the handle, here we have 4 layers. So this is very similar in style to what we're about to be doing. Here, on this one, we have 5 layers. Because it's a thick blade, we have our front, we have 2 welts, and then we have the return of the loop as well as the back. So this goes from 5 down to 4, down to 3 towards the top. So we can see multiple layers, and this is a chunky old piece. That's got to be almost an inch, 3/4 to an inch, definitely. But the important thing that we are trying to achieve with this style of stitching, you see it a lot in 1, 2 and 3. You're going to see it here. The front is the same as the back. The stitching doesn't change. We have a face stitch on the back, so when they turn the item over, the stitching on the back looks as good as the front. That's what we're trying to achieve. With an awl, we struggle with that. And it's about the force and the resistance that we meet when trying to go through such thick leather with an awl. Again, we'll talk about that in detail. Another application of stitching multiple layers is handles. Here we've got quite a chunky handle. This is swelled, but nonetheless there are still 3 layers of leather here. So this is at least 9mm thick. Again, because of the technique that we're using, we have a face stitch on the front. With a handle we can't see it, but nonetheless the face stitch is still on the back. This is a trunk handle. This is 2 layers of 4.5, so this is 9mm thick. We pre-pricked both sides and we have a face stitch on both sides. Again, once this is on the trunk, you'd never see the back. The argument is, well, I can do it with an awl because you're not going to see the back. But what if we are in a situation where you are going to see the back, like a knife sheath or whatever it be that you're adding a welt to or need multiple layers for? Why not achieve our best goal every time? Now, when it comes to making our holes, I'm going to be using the KS Blade 6 SPI iron, 12 teeth. If you were using something like this is, I believe, the Seiwa iron from Goods Japan. Craftshaw, Kyoshinelli make all similar versions. It's very similar to what you can find on Amazon as well. If this is what you're using, you have a massive tooth. The hole that this creates, and I think I cover this in the beginning of video 1, it doesn't give the sweetest looking stitch, but you can achieve with it. If you are stitching multiple layers with an iron like this, you have such a huge hole, you may not need an awl. It may help getting through that thick leather. If we're using an iron like this, the hole is far more slender, the likelihood is we are going to need an awl. So we are going to use this, we are going to use an awl, because I would rather teach you the full technique that you can leave things aside. So, well, I'm using that, I don't need it, that's fine. But teach you that where you don't need it and you're using this and you do, then we've covered all bases, haven't we? Here's an interesting thing about placement of our irons. We can look at our stitch line. So if we have a look at the stitch line on this sheath here, this is a 5mm stitch line. The reason that we've come in further. Now, when I'm teaching you at the outset, I will recommend 7 SPI and a 4mm stitch line. This is by far the sweet spot. This will give you more versatility. So if you're looking at buying irons, start with 7 SPI. If you're looking at buying one of the groovers and you're not too sure which one, buy 4mm. A 4mm stitch line and 7SPI is the most forgiving combination when stitching. Again, go back and watch video 1 for more explanation on that. But to focus on that for a moment, if we use a 4mm stitch line on particularly thick leather, we go through further with the iron on thicker leather. So if we look at the trunk handle that's 4.5mm thick, we've got to take this iron in much, much further. At 4mm, and it depends on the leather, it's kind of on the cusp. Certainly 3mm, we would get distortion at the edge of the leather where we put our holes. A classic example of this is a bridle belt. If we're using 4mm leather on a bridle belt and we're just stitching this section here for the return, for the buckle and the keep, it will distort the edge of the leather here. Then it will flatten back off again. So the top of the belt will be wider and this section will narrow down. That distortion is caused by having to go through the leather deeper because the leather is thicker. To ensure that doesn't happen, we move our stitch line in. Now, you may turn around and say, well, a 5mm stitch line is too far from the edge from me. I don't like that. We can deal with that by using different size bevels. So here, we've used quite a heavy bevel at the edge of the leather. This gives us two edges. We have a true edge, which is the edge of the leather, and we have a false edge. And the false edge is where the leather stops and the bevel starts. This could be 1.5, 2mm in from the true edge. But visually, because we blacked up that edge, and the distance between the black edge and the stitching all of a sudden seems smaller, that stitching looks more proportionate to the item. It doesn't look like it's a huge distance in from the edge of the leather. So because we are going for something so thick, we've immediately opened the opportunity to use a much heavier bevel, moving that line from here in 1.5mm, 2mm, closing the gap between the false edge and the stitching, bringing a lovely sleek line. So as a result of knowing this, I'm going to be starting with a 5mm line. Now, these are all the same shape and size. If we were making a sheath, we would follow the design that we've created from our template. However, our template will give us key start and stop points, and those key points are where we set our holes from and to. That ensures that all the holes on each piece of leather are lined up. With just 4 pieces like this, we don't necessarily have that, so we need to create it. But the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to run a 5mm stitch line down the edge of each piece of leather. Now, we're not going to stitch all the way to the end of the leather, and we're not going to stitch off the end of the leather when we start. So when we do our line, we start short and we stop short. This ensures that when we put our first stitch in, that line isn't evident. In addition to that, we put our iron on the line to straddle it. We don't put the line or the iron next to the line, because if we did, when we finish stitching, we can still see that line. That doesn't look great at all. So the idea is we create a line that we're going to hide. We don't mark the leather any more than we absolutely have to. Now this is where it gets a little bit complicated. We are going to be stitching 4 pieces of leather together. We are going to be making our holes on the front one way and the back another. We are intentionally going to cross our holes front to back. This alleviates the issue that the thread has about passing itself inside the hole. If the holes are the same front and back, we can encounter the issue where we have to put one stitch on top of the other. That angles the front, but it flattens the back. If we cross our holes, then our stitching crosses, these threads don't meet. That's the principle we're going to follow. So we need to know which is the front, which is the back. We can write on the back of them. That's absolutely fine. But what do we do with our welts? This is dictated to by the awl. We know we are going to be using an awl, and we are going through 4 layers of leather when making the holes first. But if we have 3 layers with our hole all facing the same way, then our awl will go through those 3 layers a lot easier. We have immediately created 9mm of smooth transition for the awl to go through. So we are fighting the leather far less. We don't need to go deeply through the last hole, which is crossing, it's going the other way. We just need to line up. So we're just looking for the tip of the blade. We're not driving it all the way through. If all the holes were going all the same way, we could drive it through, but we don't need to. We set our welts to match our front piece because it depends on how we're stitching. Now I'm left-handed. I favour the awl when I'm stitching with an awl in my left hand, but I'm going to do both here. I'll do right-handed. It's not going to look smooth, it's not going to look good because I'm left-handed, but I'm going to have a go right-handed. So you're going to have to be a little bit tolerant of how that goes. I will then swap to left-handed. You will see it go much more smoothly, but if you are left-handed, that's going to help you no end. Because I'm starting right-handed, this is my face leather, so my grain side is facing my right-handed, and it's going to be left-hand priority, but the grain side faces the right, and that's the one that I go in the awl with. I am going to set my 2 welts also to the right. This means on these 3 pieces of leather, all the holes face the same way. The back piece, opposite. But we're not going through this piece of leather with the awl. If I were left-handed, I'd turn that round. And that's what I'm going to be doing in a bit. Because as I go through these holes, these 3 layers of leather, all the holes are facing the same way. So when I put the awl in, it's much smoother. Lining up becomes so much easier. If you are not an adept with an awl, this is a fantastic way to learn awl discipline. Back to marking our holes. We're not making them yet, we're marking them. All my lines are on the right hand side, but I know that this one has to be the wrong way round because we're looking for our key start point. Now if I mark all of these the right way, I'm going to mark the first hole, which is my key hole to line all of my stitching up, by hooking the first tooth of the iron over the edge of the leather. That sets the second tooth in the position of the first hole for every piece of leather. If I do that on all 4 pieces the same way, there's no guarantee that the last hole lines up with the edge of the leather the same way. We can trim it, but when we're doing a sheath or a handle, we don't have that facility. It is already cut to length. So what we need to do is turn that piece around because that's how they're going to get stitched together. And we start all of our holes from the same side as they fit together. So very, very simply then, we're going to take the iron and we're going to hook the first tooth over the end of the leather. So we're going to hook the first tooth over the end of the leather. That sets the second tooth into the end of the leather 1 full stitch from the edge. We are going to straddle our line. So we have half the tooth above the line and half the tooth below. And we are just going to give it a kiss. Just so we've marked. And we're going to do all 4 pieces exactly the same way, except one piece is facing the wrong way. That is our back piece. That means when we put these 3 pieces together, all the holes will line up from one end of the leather where we're stitching. And all of our stitching will then line up. So these 3 pieces I've marked from the left. This piece I'm marking from the right. like so. Now we are less inclined to make a mistake. Mark, 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 mark. If we swap this over, this is our front, it sits up like that. This is our first welt, it sits up like that. Those holes line up. This is our third piece, it sits up like that, our holes line up. This is our fourth piece, it sits up the other way. Our holes cross at that point, but all 4 holes at the end of each piece of leather are perfectly in line. They're perfectly in line because of the depth that we've chosen. So when we put these together, those holes will line up. That's the first part of making this job, stitching 4 layers of leather, easier. Having marked all of our holes from the correct end in how our leather is going together, we're going to mark all of our holes working our way down. We are applying the principle of leading and dragging. This ensures that all of our holes, or all of our stitch lines, are the correct length. If we get that wrong, then we can have more holes on one piece, less holes on the other, or misalignment of holes. If that sounds familiar, you need to get yourself over to the channel and you need to look at the leading and dragging video on there. That will solve all of your problems. How many times have you cut a piece of leather, made the holes, repeated the process, only to find out you've got more holes on one piece than you have on the other, or the holes don't line up at all? That is an issue of leading and dragging. That is a problem that can be solved. So with our holes marked, we are going to make our holes. So I'm bringing in a pad so I can drive the iron through the leather. And the idea here is to drive the iron through the leather exactly the same distance every time. If we have a look at how much steel is poking out the back, we've got a good 3mm there. If I can do that every single time, then all of the holes that I make are going to be the same size. Never pull the iron out of the leather, push the leather off the iron. It stresses the tool less, it stresses the leather less. So if we do exactly the same again, and we have a look, and there we're probably closer to 2mm, so a little bit more. Same again. Push the leather off the iron. When we look, our holes are the same size as we move down. If these holes are smaller, these stitches will be longer because there's more leather between each hole. If these holes are bigger, the stitching will be shorter because there's less leather between each hole. If we are inconsistent with this, then we'll have long and short stitches running throughout the length of our stitching. That's letting us down. So consistently driving our iron through the leather, showing 3mm at the back, will give us the same size hole every single time. Same again. Now, that's the first piece done. We want to do the second piece. We have to be conscious of not varying the angle of the iron. We may be comfortable and we may look at that and think that's straight. And if we do every single piece of leather the same, then the hole on the front is at one level, the hole on the back is at a different level. Your holes will not line up. If you vary either way, so if we strike the iron with the iron away from us, the holes on the back will come in much deeper, further away from the edge of the leather. If we strike the iron with the iron towards us, and I appreciate this is a little extreme, the hole will come out much closer to the edge of the leather. That will cause our stitching or our holes to be inconsistently lined up. That will make stitching almost impossible. We have to keep that tool straight, and if we do struggle, we can do something like use the pulling block to set it up, and we can strike it at a right angle to ensure that we are vertical. But it is a case of one of those situations where we quite simply have to get used to it. It's part of the technique, and this is possibly why I have the iron facing this way, because as I look at it from this angle, this is what I see. I can see the iron is vertical. That's helping me ensure that all of my holes are lined up. And we have, again, lovely depth. I'm going to make all of the holes on all 4 pieces, and then we'll have a look at stitching. There we are, that's our 4 pieces with all the holes made in our leather. In making our holes first, we have removed a massive amount of resistance from this technique. It's going to allow the soft awl to glide through, open the hole up, and give the ability to stitch far more comfortably. We are fighting nothing. Why is it important not to fight anything? So here I've got 2 pieces of 3mm stitched together. I have pricked a set of holes. They're not made. We're going to pop that in the clam. This is representative of stitching with an awl. No support on the leather whatsoever. What we're quite simply going to do is line up our awl blade and push. Look at that distortion. Also, what's happening is as we push, our 2 pieces of leather have done this. We've got misalignment going on at the top. If we try and push this back to line that back up again, we immediately see that our awl is going down. So we line these edges up, our awl is facing down, which means our hole on the front looks fine, but our hole on the back is far too high. This is having an impact. If we were to do that again, but support it, even with that support, that leather is still distorting. So when we look at that level of distortion, that's evidently having an impact on the back of our leather. Pre-pricking our holes removes this fight. We are not using a sharp awl, we're not making a new hole. So if I take that out and use a soft awl to find the same hole, as I push that, that distortion is reduced. It's still there, but nonetheless I'm finding the same hole. So the battle is reduced dramatically. As the battle has been reduced, accuracy increases. So making the holes first is a lengthier process, but the results are far better. We're adding a whole bunch of extra stuff. It takes a lot longer, but it's about the result. If you're in it to make money, you're making the best thing that you can. If you are achieving your best self with this, brilliant, you don't need to be watching this. If you're not, this is the video for you. Or if you're cutting your teeth and that's where you want to go, this is the video for you. But if we are going down the quickest path, but we are not achieving an optimal level, there's only so much we can charge for that. But if we introduce processes that the construction time increases, but the quality of the item that we produce at the end of it is a much higher level, then our price point changes. So it's proportionality. If I can make a better quality item, I can charge more money for it. If I can't make a good quality item, I can't charge a lot for it. What's it to be? And I'm not necessarily saying that you're in it to make money. I do teach professionals, and I know professionals watch this. But even if you're a hobbyist, then you're not constrained by time. So you can add as many processes to your build as you need to achieve your optimal level. After all, you're spending all of that money on materials, all of that money on tools, all of that time on learning. Why are you not achieving your best effort? This will give you that. So what we want to do now is put our 4 pieces together in preparation for stitching. What we will notice is one of these things is not like the other. They all look the same at the moment, but we have our start points. Our start points are here, 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 and here. So this one is the wrong way round. So if we turn that round, that's how we made our holes. That's how we're going to line them up. And a very, very simplistic way of doing this is if we take a needle and we put it through the first hole of one piece, the second, the third, all from the face, because they're all facing the same way, and at which point then we put it through the back of the hole on our back piece. Our needle goes through that quite easily. We do exactly the same at the opposite end. First, second, third, fourth. What we are looking for when we set our leather together with a set of needles, and it doesn't need to be beginning and end, it can be the first hole and 20 holes down, whatever it be, because it may begin to curve, but you pick a point. We are looking at these 2 needles being parallel. If they are not parallel, either your holes don't line up or your leather isn't lined up correctly, or you've chosen the wrong hole. So if we're seeing something like that, then something is wrong. Here, we're happy with that. Now, at this moment in time, because we've got a face on one side and a face on the other, it's very easy to forget which way the welts are facing. So we just have a quick look and we can see that's a grain side, that's a grain side, this is our right hand side. So we are going to start stitching in that direction first. So I'm going to stitch right hand, so I'm going to set that in my clam facing the left. So we are about to stitch this piece of leather. The question is, how much thread do I need? And I am constantly seeing people answer this question, of people genuinely wanting to know, and they are saying, oh, ×5. And it's a guess. They're guessing, and their advice to somebody else is for them to guess. No, we can work it out. We are stitching 203 millimeters. So we can write that down. 203 mil. Okay, let's just call it 200 for quick maths. Most people are saying ×5. That will give you 1,000. That's a metre of thread. Okay, that's a guess without doubt. The difficulty with this is people don't appreciate how thick they're stitching. So if we have something that is 12 millimeters apart, we are stitching 4.5 mil, and our stitch is on both sides. So for every stitch we need 9 millimeters of thread. This thread goes through each hole twice, so that's 24 millimeters. So the total of this is 33. We need 33 millimeters for just each stitch. We don't know how many holes we got. It gets problematic because it goes in, it goes out, we can see it. There is such a simple way of fixing this. Now, I've had this equation on my website for years. It started off as a PDF. It then became a web app. It is now an app for your phone. If you are on Apple, go to Apple Store, search for thread length calculator, click on the QR code now and download it. If you are on Android, go to the Play Store, search for thread length calculator, click on the QR code now and download it. This is what it will give you. We open up the menu. We are stitching by length. We are stitching 203 millimeters. So we put 203 millimeters in. We are stitching at 6 SPI. It says 4.3 there, the tool says 4.5. It's negligible, but it will work. We then need to calculate, and this is where it goes wrong, how thick an item we're stitching. So let's just say, for argument's sake, we are stitching a 3mm piece of leather. We want 200 millimeters left over on each thread, each needle, to ensure we can finish our stitching. Let's calculate on that. That's 1088. So the times 5 guess was not far off the mark. But we are not stitching 3mm. Let's say, for argument's sake, we were stitching 2 together. We're stitching 6mm. We calculate, that's 1375. It changes. The length of stitching we're stitching doesn't change, but the thickness of the item that we're stitching does. We're not stitching 6, we're stitching 12. Calculate. 1934. And even down the bottom gives us a hole count of 47 holes. So we know we need 2 meters of thread. That's double. So that's times 10. Because we are stitching something so thick. Without doubt, there is more thread hidden in a thick item than is visible. You've got to calculate for that. Your times 5, your times 6s, they are all guesses. This is not a guess. It's proven, it's tried, it's tested, it works. It's free. There is no excuse not to be using it. It is available as an app for your phone. You always have your phone with you. So you can calculate how much thread you need every single time. It will not fail you. Go and download it. Now we know how much thread we need. We can go and get 2 meters of thread. We are set up in our clam. The top of our leather line up, the end of our leather line up. Everything is clean and crisp. We're ready to stitch. I'm not going to go into back stitching for this. I have covered that in the first 3 videos. It doesn't change. How you back stitch is exactly the same. I'm going to go straight into the stitching because now this is about having all of the holes pre-pricked and using the soft awl to open the hole up. But before we do so, I'm going to see if we can stitch this. Now I'm stitching right-handed, right-hand priority, so no awl at the moment. So what I'm going to do is try and find my first hole. That goes through. I then pull that through. That's a little snug. That's where the thread is hitting the eye of the needle. We can use some beeswax and give that a tug just to pull that through. Now I can center my thread. We are ready to stitch. Right-handed, right-hand priority. This is exactly the same as the other, going through 4 layers of leather. That sails through. Same stitching style. Left-hand needle goes in the gap, creates that cross, pulls through, index finger comes over, hook, left-hand needle, back towards the back of the empty side of the hole. What I'm doing here is as I'm pushing that needle in, I'm also pulling the thread at the same time. This is helping draw the needle through, and it's also helping to prevent piercing the thread, because you are going to pierce the thread a lot with thick leather. Pull on to make sure we haven't pierced. We're stitching from low to high, so I'm going to cast. That is going to be a task. Back to the beeswax, and that comes out with it. Even with a tough old bit of leather like this, we can still pull that needle out. Proportionality. Tension. Exactly the same. We can see both stitches. Now, you hear me talk about the tension change when we add layers of leather. With a single layer of leather, there's a sponginess to it. That sponge is level 2. As we add a second layer, that sponginess becomes level 4. Now it's level 8. So we need actually less power to seat those stitches in than we do for a single layer, because there's far more sponge. We apply the same level of force, we will perhaps sink our stitching in a little too deep. Let's stay with the top view for a moment. So right hand needle, next available empty hole, that goes through. Left hand needle creates that cross, and I'm achieving this at the moment without using an awl. Back to the beeswax. Let's see how many of these we can do. A little bit of tension, not much. Next. That's working an absolute dream. So this just goes to show you, at the moment, no awl. It's tough, without doubt, but no awl, we are achieving. Let's try another one. This is a little harder. Probably more about finding the hole than anything. Beeswax through. Tension. This is working. We are getting a lovely saddle stitch on both sides. Continue on. Using the right needle, because it's blunt, it's finding the hole. It's tough. But if I step away from this for an hour, because I've only just made the holes, and come back, I will find the holes will begin to close up. So if that happens, we're going to defer to an awl. Now, again, I'm doing this right-handed, so you'll have to bear with me. I'll go left-handed in a bit. What we're after achieving here is bringing the awl to the front. So what I've done is I've taken my needle, which is between my thumb and forefinger, and put it between my forefinger and middle finger. I'm then using the thumb to push the awl forward and line it up with the hole. The first thing to remember is the hole is at this angle. So are the holes in the next two pieces of leather. So all three pieces of leather have the same hole. So driving this in, those three layers of leather, is so much easier. But even with the holes made, because as the blade goes in deeper, it gets bigger, we will still find resistance. And we can see here it's beginning to push here. Now, if I push this all the way through and have a good bit of steel poking out, I will distort the hole on the back. That will change its direction because it's sitting at this angle at the moment, and if I push the awl through, it'll sit at this angle. That stitch will not sit correctly. So all I'm after doing is just being able to see the tip of the awl blade. I can't even feel it, but I can see it. That's enough. Now, my style of stitching is about to change. It doesn't have to. But if we go for a more traditional style, in fact, let's come back to traditional style. Let's stick with the style that we know. So, what we can do now, because we've lined those holes up, we've made them a little bigger, we can take the awl out. We can bring the needle back to the front, and we use the right hand needle as our prime needle. So technically we are stitching right-handed, right hand priority still. Our left hand needle goes in the gap, creates that cross, pulls through, back into the hole, maybe, cast, and we can take that out. That's made our stitching a little easier. We come back, visual, we can see the two stitches, we pull until they disappear from view, and that's enough. Exactly the same now. Needle between the index finger and middle finger, thumb brings the awl forward, we line it up with the holes on the right hand side, push it through those three layers of leather, finding that last layer until the glint appears. We take the awl out, we bring it to the back of the hand, we bring the needle to the front, right hand needle first, right-handed, right hand priority. Left hand needle goes in the gap, creates that cross, pulls through, index finger comes over, left hand needle to the back of the leather, back into that hole and cast. So in using an awl, we are still stitching right-handed, right hand priority. This is a little bit of a step away from the traditional style of stitching. So to look at that more traditional style, we would bring our awl into play with our right hand, go through those 3 layers of leather. We are looking for the glint of the awl blade on our back piece. This is giving you a target. The awl is following the holes, so the awl is teaching you how it wants to be held. If you develop into traditional style, this is a fantastic way of learning. Following that traditional style ethos, we are going to now change which needle goes back in first. We are changing from stitching right hand priority, which right hand, leather faces the right, the awl's in the right hand, we're making a hole from the right. We take the awl out, first needle's right. And we are now going to stitch right-handed, still all with the right hand, but the left hand needle is now our priority. Right-handed, left hand priority. So we are going to take the awl out and we are going to follow it back with our second needle. This changes the dynamics somewhat. Now all our business goes on the right. So our right hand needle still goes in the gap between the 2 objects and creates that cross. We pull through. Index finger still comes over, pulls towards us. Again, if you're struggling with left and right hand stitching, go and watch the other 3 videos. Right hand needle now back into the empty side of that hole and push through. Pull that thread to make sure we haven't pierced. We have changed the dynamics. We have gone from stitching right-handed to left-hand. What's going to happen here is we need to assess, do we need to cast? We do not cast as a matter of course. We only cast when we need to cast. What's happening here is we're going from the top of the previous hole to the bottom of the next hole. That means this loop wants to be at the bottom. It already is. We do not need to cast. So we've removed that process immediately. We come back, tension is exactly the same. We can see those 2 stitches. We pull until they disappear from view and we relax. Let's stick with the overhead. So right-handed, left-hand priority. Needle between the 2 fingers, all to the front. Line it up with the hole, push it through until we can see that glint. Left hand needle into the hole, follow the awl back. Take the awl, push it to the back, bring the needle to the front. Not bad for a left-hander. Right hand needle in the gap, create that cross, pull that needle through. Index finger over the top, pull towards us. Right hand needle comes back into the empty side of that hole. Pull that thread to make sure we haven't pierced. We know, because we're stitching right-handed, left-hand priority, we do not need to cast. And we take that needle out, all of the slack, come back nice and intimate, and tension. Again, right-handed, left-hand priority. Needle between the 2 fingers, all to the front. In to the hole, through those 3 layers of leather, which is the easy bit. Just the tip of the blade, we can just see the hint of a glint on the left hand hole. That's enough to line the holes up, but it's not enough to change the angle of the hole. Follow it back with the left hand needle, all to the back of the hand, needle to the front. In the gap, create that cross, hook over, back into the left hand, hole, pull with the left hand thread. No cast is required. Take out all the slack, come back nice and intimate, and tension. That's looking lovely. Now, what you are not seeing me do is you are not seeing me put this awl into that hole, getting it where I want it, and then twisting it. Twisting the awl reams the hole, it rounds it. That will cause the stitching to sit funny. We have gone to the effort of spending all that money on an iron with angled teeth. If we then ream that awl and round the hole, what's the point? We might as well use a pricking wheel. So do not twist your awl. Left hand needle, follow it back. Right handed, because that's where the awl is. Left hand, because that's the first needle. And we continue like so. Take out all of our slack. Come back nice and intimate and tension. That is looking lovely on our right side. That is looking lovely on our left side. We continue. So we have two options here if you're right-handed. Option number one. So we stick with the style of stitching we're comfortable with. We just introduced the awl. We put the awl in. We look for that glint in the hole. We take the awl out with our right hand and we put the right hand needle in first. Left hand needle goes in the gap, back through the hole, and then we cast because we are stitching right hand priority. We are stitching to ensure that the stitch comes from the bottom of the last hole to the top of the next, so we need to cast. That's option number one. If you are comfortable with your style of stitching and you are only introducing the awl, that's absolutely fine. That is an ideal way of learning. If you want to develop to the next step, option number two, right-handed, left-hand priority. Pop the awl in, find that hole, see the glint, follow it back with a left-hand needle, right-hand needle into the gap, create that cross, pull towards us, back in with the right hand needle, pull to make sure we haven't pierced, no cast is required. That's it. That is literally it. We have been stitching 4 pieces of 3mm leather. They're not glued, all the holes are made independently, and already we can see we have a very credible looking stitch on both the front and the back. So just for eye candy, I'm going to stitch a few more. I'm going to stitch to about here. That I think is the middle-ish. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to turn the leather around. I'm going to do everything that I've just done, but left-handed. And we'll call this our last one. What I'm going to do, again, I'm not worried about back stitches because I've covered those in plenty of detail in the other videos. So we're just going to stop. This is as far as I've got. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to write on here R. That's right-handed. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it around, and the other ends of the leather may not be as smart. They're a bit raggy there because I started from the nice end. This is the rough end. So I'm starting from the end, if you like. The most important thing to remember here, I have turned this round, so the arrow is now facing the other way, which means these 3 pieces of leather on the left-hand side all have the same hole facing the same way. This is the back side, so this is the side that I put the awl in from now. We did it from the right side with the other way round, so I'm going to start from the end, stitch back towards the middle. So let's have a look at that. We're going to start left-handed, left-hand priority. If you're used to stitching left hand without an awl, this is a good place to start. Again, I'm not particularly fussed about starting with a back stitch. We pop the awl through so we can see the glint, and we can just about see that there. All we're going to do, take the awl out and centre our thread. With our thread centered, we're ready to go. Needle to the back, awl to the front, and we pop it into that hole, line it up with the hole and pop it through our leather until that glint shows. Pop that out, bring the awl to the back, needle to the front. Left-handed, left-hand priority. Our face leather is facing the left, our awl is in our left hand, our first needle is our left-hand needle. Exactly the same as we've been stitching before. We've got the gap, create that cross with the needle in the gap, pull through, index finger over, pull back, back into the hole. Now we're stitching left-handed. We have to ask the question, do we need to cast? We're going from high to low, the loop is already low, we do not need to cast. A little bit of beeswax there, just to encourage that needle through. Take out all the slack, come back, tension, do not need much. Needle to the back, awl to the front. Back into that hole again. The hint of a glint, there we go, I'm a poet and I didn't know it. Draw that back, awl to the back, needle to the front, left hand needle back in. This is pretty much it for stitching left hand priority. A little bit of a tough pull back there. That issue is where the holes are crossing, just inside that leather, because the hole between the two pieces of leather is reduced. Once again, straight in, looking for that glint. There it is. Don't need to go any further than that. Back out, swap the needle over to the front, pop the left hand needle in. Create that cross and pull back. No cast. Take out all the slack, come back and tension. And already we're building up a nice looking consistent saddle stitch. Exactly the same again. Left hand, set the awl to the angle of the hole, push it through, bring the awl to the back, needle to the front, pop that left needle through. The priority bit is the first needle. And there we go, beautiful. Let's have a quick look at that over the top again. All in, look for that glint, all out, to the back, needle to the fore, pop it in the hole, create the cross, complete the stitch. So that's stitching left-handed, left-hand priority. Let's now swap it to left-handed, right-hand priority. This is quite simply a case of changing which needle goes in first. So we go in with the awl because we're stitching left-handed. We come out with the awl and we follow it back with a right-hand needle. Our left-hand needle now goes in the gap and we create that cross. Left-hand needle goes back through the hole. All the gubbins now goes on the right-hand side. Because we've changed the dynamics of what we're doing, we have to ask the question, do we need to cast? Here we are going from low to high. The loop is low, it needs to be high. Yes, we cast. Again, this is about knowing why we cast, where to cast. It's not just a case of casting for the sake of casting. Again, left-handed, right-hand priority. In with the awl with the left hand. Find the glint of that awl blade, follow it back with the right-hand needle. Left-hand needle into that gap, create that cross, pull through, hook with the index finger, left-hand needle back into the empty side of that hole. Here we can see we've pierced it, we keep pulling on, it will just come off the end and cast. I'm stitching with tiger thread here at the moment. This is very forgiving with piercing thread, very. If you pierce it, it will self-heal. So let's have a look at that from the top. So, needle between the two fingers, bring the awl to the front, into the left-hand hole, through to the right until we see that glint, pull the awl out, follow the blade back in. Left hand needle into the cross, into the gap, create that cross, back into the hole. Pull that thread at the same time to encourage the needle through. The thread came out at the back of the needle anyway. That is already representative of a cast, so we don't need to cast again. We can cast too many times if we're not careful. So where does this business come from of going in with the awl and following it back? The idea behind it was when you are blind stitching. So this is when you have the clam between your legs at an angle and you are stitching a big piece of leather. You cannot see the back because it is swept over. So it's done by feel. You would find with the tip of your finger the awl blade. Line the awl blade with a needle. As you pull the awl back through, you follow it through. That's going to crop up in the traditional style of stitching, but that's the idea behind it. There is another idea as well. As we push the awl in, and this is more about when we're making our holes with the awl, not necessarily with a soft awl, all the fibres are pointing the same direction as the awl. So if we come out with the awl and we go in with the left hand needle, we are going in with all the fibres. Everything's pointing that way. So that needle goes in beautifully. Now there's a thread inside the hole. We're going back in with the right hand needle, but what we're doing is we're going in against those fibres. Because we've closed the hole down by putting a thread inside it, that's a little bit of a harder pull, because we're fighting all of those fibres that are pointing the same direction as this arrow. So the argument would be, if you go in with the awl from the left hand and all the fibres are pointing that way, we are putting the awkward stitch in first, where there's the maximum amount of space, because we're pulling against the fibres. Still difficult. That is an easier pull. Now the second needle, which is the harder pull, is going in, but it's going in with those fibres. So now all of a sudden we're finding it a little easier to pull that through, because it's going in line with everything. It's not fighting that friction of the fibres going the wrong way. So that's an argument for following the needle back, or following the awl back with the first needle, and then going in line with the way the awl went with the second needle. It's following a path of less resistance, not necessarily least. But this is more of a case of what you are comfortable with. If you are more comfortable stitching in a style where you don't want to change from left to right-handed, there is absolutely nothing wrong with deferring back to in with the left hand, out with the awl, in with the left hand. It is going to be what it's going to be. And again here we've switched over to left hand priority, no cast. They both work. Move that down a fraction and then carry on. But we can see quite clearly from where we stitch this right-handed, this is our face stitch, this is left-handed, this is our face stitch. Our back is all over here, yet we still have a really nice looking stitch. So when we're stitching something heavy, like a handle or a knife sheath or something else, and I'm sure there's plenty of things where we would stack or add a welt, we can achieve it. We don't have to fight the leather with the irons at the outset. We don't have to fight the leather with an awl. Again, if you are capable of doing that and it's working for you, carry on. Don't change. This is not about this is the only way you should be stitching, all other ways are wrong. Absolutely not. This is, are you achieving? No. Why are you not achieving? Could some of these tips and techniques assist you in moving forward and getting rid of some problems you might be facing? And if that's the case, then yeah, this is a really good style of stitching. And I've been at this for a little while. There's a good chance these holes have begun to close up. But do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put the awl down. I've got what? 3 more holes to stitch. Let's just defer back to right-handed. See if I can still find these holes without using the awl. I can. That's going to be tough though. So even after, and it's probably been a couple of hours here in the workshop because it's taken me time to film it. Look at that. I'm still going through, struggling, but nonetheless, the holes are still lining up. And I've also had lunch. So that's given, and it's a rainy day, so there's a lot of moisture in the air. The leather's going to be soaking up that moisture, which means the holes are going to close quicker. If you're in a more arid climate, that can bring about its own problems with your leather, but nonetheless, you will find your holes will close up slower. Last one, without an awl. So we are still achieving, that is snug. Temptation to push, but if you have to push, how are you getting it out? We're getting it out with a bit of wax. And then last one, and then we'll take a look at what we've achieved. Look at that. Can't argue with that. Much easier with an awl, without doubt, but still achievable without. And if you defer to something huge like this, easier still. So that's a brief insight into stitching multiple layers. We've had a look at perhaps a couple of applications for this style of seam or stitching multiple layers together. But to be fair, I'm sure you will come up with ideas that you're already working on that you want to increase thickness by layering up. But it's not just a case of heavy leather. If we were to look at something like the notebook. So this project is quite a popular one, but here we've got 3 layers of leather. Each layer is 1.5 millimeters thick, and where we have put them together we have thinned down, so the edge all of a sudden is a lot thinner. But the principles of pre-pricking and multiple layers stand even here. This is much thinner, much lighter leather. We can go closer to the edge with our stitch line, and we still get a face stitch on both sides. Using this technique here works. Even with things like wallets, card holders, the like, multiple layer system of pre-pricking work. Would we have to use an awl on 1.5mm leather? It's very unlikely. This is 12mm thick overall. That's no more than 4mm with a little bit of skiving. So it's going to be an awful lot easier. But nonetheless, let's have a look at what we've done. So this is our stitching. Here we have our right hand, and here we have our left. This is the direction that we started from. So on both pieces, right and left, this is our face. Let's tap down those stitches. Why are we tapping down the stitches? We're tapping down the stitches to get rid of any unevenness that has been caused through stitching. We are also looking at closing our hole up somewhat, and we're also looking at bringing the vibrancy back to our thread. So if I just do a couple on camera, we can already see the difference between this stitching and this. This is far more vibrant, much stronger than this. So it brings back the colour. This is particular to braided polyester and nylon thread. As we put it under tension, it becomes very slightly opaque. Tapping it down brings the vibrancy back. Brighter colours works even better. But it also flattens the leather behind the stitching, closing the hole up, protecting it from any moisture getting inside. Let me do it all. And there we go. Good look at the top. So this is our this is our face side. This is right-handed. This is left. We've stitched this partially right-handed, right-hand priority, right-handed, left-hand priority. This is left hand, stitching left hand priority, left hand, right hand priority. That's the face. That's the back. There's no difference. When we are making small leather goods and we want a face stitch on both the front and the back, this is how we achieve it. It's as simple as that. This is a big stitch line. We perhaps, on 3mm leather, could have comfortably got away with a 4mm stitch line. But I've encouraged you to come into 5mm to cover this issue, because if you are going multiple layers, especially with knife sheaths, so a good example here, this leather is 4mm thick. If I tried to create my stitch line on this leather at 4mm, it would be too close to the edge after I bevel, and we could be looking at a level of distortion down the leather here. So it's come in 5mm, but it does not look 5mm, and we're going to have a look at that now. So if we choose this section first, and perhaps we start with a Palo Santo number 1, and we are just going to bevel this first edge here. This creates a false edge. So we have our true edge, which is the edge of our leather, and then we have our false edge, and our false edge is from the cut of the bevel. So we've brought this in just under 1mm. So we've closed the distance from our stitching to our visible edge, false edge, a little. If we increase that by going to a number 2 and doing the other side, we'll notice that distance change even more. If we put them both together, and perhaps tilt it slightly, we can see there the difference of our two bevels. If we go slightly larger still, and here I've got a Barry King number 1. Now bearing in mind, this was a Palo Santo number 1, this is a Barry King number 1. Number 1 does not travel between manufacturers. Here we take off an awful lot more meat, and we can see how much. So there's Palo Santo number 1, there's Barry King number 1, there's Palo Santo number 2. But suffice it to say, we've taken a lot more leather off, and our false edge has come in much closer to our stitching. Let's go further still and go for a Jeremiah Watt Horseshoe Brand Tools number 1. And get that out of the way. And here we'll take a huge chunk off. Bigger still, there's 3 number 1s in that. And we can see there the dynamics of what we're creating have changed dramatically. We can see a much closer representation of this stitch here, where we've used a much larger bevel because it's a sheath, it's going to get battered about. Rounding this edge is really going to protect it. We can see because this is well used. This is not just a showpiece, it goes out and it gets used. This edge gets battered, where it's getting knocked up against bushes and branches and the like, and giving that big rounded edge protects it, it softens it. But we've used a 5mm stitch line, we've used 4 different sizes of bevelers, and we've got 4 different views. This looks a little distance, this looks better, this looks better still, this is closer. I would suspect that this one may well be the sweet spot, the Barry King number 1. would possibly be the absolute sweet spot for a 5mm stitch line. I think that looks lovely. And then we look at the distance between that false edge and the stitching, and now all of a sudden we are much closer to 3mm. Certainly not 5. We can make our very heavy leather look much sleeker just by adding a bevel. But it's kind of something you need to know at the outset. What's the purpose of the item? What's it going to be used for? What do I want it to look like? If you make the decision early on, I want a heavy bevel to round it, bring your stitch line in. If you're making the decision that you want your stitch line closer because you want a finer bevel, but you're using leather that will take it, fine. But a heavier leather will push you towards a 5mm stitch line because of the distortion going through that leather at the edge creates. But folks, we're there. That's how to stitch multiple layers. 4, it can be 6, it can be 3. 2 we've already covered. We can achieve really, really well. You can go up to 1 inch with this. Perhaps you would need a longer awl. That would be the one difference. But the face stitch is the same on both sides. We have an item that is elevated because it looks good on the front and the back. Depending what it is, it may not be obvious if there is indeed a front or a back because of the stitching. Our stitching is our framing. If it's framed well, we can't see it. It just becomes part of the whole. If it's framed poorly, stitched poorly, you can't help but see it and the whole thing is let down. You can stitch something well, but your cut pieces aren't necessarily the best they could be. There's a bit of adjustment, but it works and it looks good. You can get away with it. Don't practice your cutting. But you can cut something well and stitch it poorly, still works, but it doesn't look right. Are you satisfied with your stitching? If you are, fine. If you're not, I hope this helps. Folks, take care, enjoy, and I'll speak to you soon.